Good morning. Welcome to our keynote lecture. It's my great pleasure to introduce Eckart Altenmüller. Eckart's background is both as a medical doctor and as a professional flautist. In terms of the field of music psychology, Eckart is one of the essential figures in the entire modern history of the field, producing studies revealing how we know music and perceive it, how we perform it, studies focusing on minute details of how music is measured, and large philosophical issues pertaining to the ability to study the psychology of music. And I know that very recently you just won an enormous German neuroscience award. What was this one?
It was the State Award of Lower Saxony for Science.
So this award is so big that the entire field of music psychology was excited that somebody in our field had won it. And we are very fortunate to have him here today, not only presenting a keynote, but focusing a keynote on our field of Dalcroze eurythmics. So it's a very exciting event. Please give a warm welcome to Eckart Altenmüller.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric, for this very nice introduction. Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to thank Angelika and John for inviting me. It's a great honor for me to be here at the second Dalcroze conference. And I have to say, my interest in Jacques Dalcroze is now 20 years old when Reinhard Ring, who is here in the first row, asked me to write a chapter for the Lexikon der Rhythmik, edited by Ring and Steinmann, on music physiology and anatomy in rhythmics. And at that time I read, it's exactly 20 years ago when you came into my office and asked me to write this. So it's a great pleasure to be here. And I want to have some fun also with you. So the first thing is look at this very common scene from the last year neuroscience conference in Budapest and think about what is special in this small sequence. So there's something special which the only creature in the universe which can do it is Homo sapiens. So what is it? Pardon? Clapping? Yeah, clapping. Some animals can clap. Oh, they're small. It's, I mean, gorillas, for instance. Them, movement. Many people can move. Many animals can move. Along the beat. So the point is, this is a very complex scene because the audience is synchronizing to a changing beat. It's an accelerando. And what you need in terms of brain science, of course, is first you have to listen to the music. Then you have to retrieve theories, how this will continue. And then you have to prepare your action in the changing of the tempo. And this is so complex. You need a huge brain machine, the frontal lobe, to do this. And this is unique to Homo sapiens. So, and as I've written above this nice video, of course, movements produce music. And on the other hand, music produces movements in the audience, and it also produces emotions. I just took the root of "e moves us." So, it has to be learned. And it's not innate from the very beginning. It has a kind of natural, I would say, development. And you see here these two kids, they have the task to tap in synchrony. Look at these kids. Not bad. But still unstable. So you see here, one thing which is so important, and we have seen before, is that music is also about communication. So it's very important that these two children are interacting, are communicating, and they love it. And they have a kind of flow experience even, maybe. So what I want to talk about is, first of all, I have now heard so many lectures about Jacques Dalcroze and embodiment. I will be very brief on this. We have in Germany a saying that is everything is said, but not from everybody. So I will not do this. I will then come to Jacques Dalcroze's brain, and I will show you how one of the essence of the whole method or approach is, of course, the networking of the brain structures. Then I will briefly go into musical learning and motor learning, and this is one of my core interests in the last 20 years. And then I will go into the sonification of movement and in applied movement therapy. That's another part I do. I do a kind of neurologic music therapy. I show you how we transform movements of stroke patients into kind of music and try to improve recovery. And then finally I come to my hobby, and you have to listen to this. This is evolution. Why do we have music? And this is something I really love to talk about, and so you have to listen to it. Anyway, okay. So, I think you all know this very famous quote of it. We do not only listen to music with our ears, it resonates in our whole body, in the brain and in the heart. And then a second very famous quote, there should be no separation between thinking and acting. And this is what modern brain science also thinks about thinking. Thinking is nothing else than moving in thoughts. And many of you know this, when you move, you think better. So for instance, when I design my lectures, I tend to improvise on the piano, and the thoughts will come into my brain, and my secretary will try to avoid any phone calls. Okay, so embodiment, the last 2 years, I was very much interested in this kind of way, how to overcome dualism. And the idea of embodiment, as you all know, is very old. It has the first roots already in the antique theories of the philosophers. So musical acting does not depend solely on brain processes, but results from structures widely distributed across the whole body. And this is something we all know. For instance, our emotion, our feeling is, of course, heavily influenced by the bodily feelings of tension, by the facial grimacing, all the things which have been nicely summarized in the work of Damasio as somatic markers of emotions. Then music is also very social. It arises, musical acting arises from interactions with the social and physical environment. So this is what I mean, which is so important, and that has been addressed yesterday, that of course, making music or dancing is always communicating. Even if you are alone in your practice room, you somehow communicate with a kind of virtual alter ego. So musical acting is embedded, and I would maybe say embedded in society or in our group living. And then finally, musical acting can reach beyond the boundaries of skull and skin, integrating resources internal and external to the individual. This is in some way trivial, but of course we respond to what is coming to us back. If you have seen those people clapping to the musicians in Budapest, and they are of course influencing the musicians on the other side, so it's a kind of externalization of the emotions here and a kind of integration of resonance, emotional resonance. And finally, musical acting is sense-making, understood as an emergent, skillful knowing how that consists in interactions between the individual and its environment. And the knowing how, that is so important. This is something which is so inherent to Dalcroze's methods. He's talking a lot about knowing how, and I remember when I worked with Wilfried Grun, I did this for a couple of, maybe 15 years, where we always criticized that in most of our schools in Germany, people learn about music, but they do not learn music. So for instance, they know how many B's are in E flat major, 3, I hope, but they don't know to sing, let's say, a major or a minor mode. Okay, so musical acting is enacted. So this is just the philosophical stuff, and now we go to the more practical things. And well, I say Dalcroze's brain, of course. This is what I usually, it's my introductory slide, usually for my students. So I explain you the brain. So it's very simple. All what is blue or dark blue, this is action. And what is red, yellow, and orange, this is perception. And if we start with the very beginning, for instance, if we move ourselves, of course we have to program our neurons in the vertebral column in the motor area, and at the same time we activate about 1/3 of the sensory areas here. If we plan movements and if we kind of program motor sequences, for instance, the famous Luria task, just tapping your fingers like this here in a very fast sequence. If you do this and you do it now for the first time, you will have a very huge blow in your supplementary motor area. This is a way where you program novel movements. But the idea to follow my advice and program this kind of things, the will, the decision, will I do it or will I not do it? Is it ridiculous or not? This is, of course, the frontal lobe, the orbitofrontal lobe here. And this is about social relatedness. And this part of the brain is the most important for all of us because it programs the consequences of our actions for us and for other people. So this is a social brain here. And it is interesting that the social brain, when I was starting to think about this, it's a theory, by the way, by Dunbar. 15 years ago, it was formulated. It was said, well, this brain region will be mature at age 16. And then it was 5 years later, no, maybe age 18. And 2 months ago, somebody found that there's even still neurogenesis and still synaptogenesis at age 23 and 24. So this is a time where you program your actions in relation to the society and in relation to the consequence of your doing. And that is what especially about humans, that we can anticipate what our doings will have for consequences. So as you now see, just a simple movement like the Luria movement here. If I show this, we have the motor areas here. We have it linked to our visual areas, so you see my fingers moving, and while you see them, you will program already in your motors areas, you will program this movement. You will hear if you are silent, you will hear my fingers. Maybe you can hear. So we have the auditory cortex, and of course, you will also somehow anticipate and link a kind of meaning to this kind of movement. It's a movement sequence which has a meaning, which has a symbol in the moment. So it's Luria's movement, for instance, which was designed to test for neurological diseased patients. And all these things are so powerfully networked because they are linked to emotions, to the limbic system, because we are interested in it, we like it. And that is one of the things why music and dance is so powerful in driving brain plasticity. That means in driving changes of brain structure and functions. So if you now come to the brain structures, you can have a lot of new methods. So this is from my friend Gottfried Schlauch from Boston University. And on the left hand, you see the networks between the temporal lobe, that's where hearing is, and the frontal lobe, that's where planning is, or where moving is. And you see this huge, that is a temporal lobe, this is a left frontal lobe. Here's a right temporal lobe, here's a right frontal lobe. And you see in the 65-year-old musician, huge connections. And in the poor 63-year-old non-musician, very, very thin connections. So this is just to show that if you regularly interact sensory, motor, auditorily, you will form neuronal pathways, highways, I would say, which are, by the way, constituent from myelin. That is one of the isolation parts of the neuronal axons. And these pathways will be formed because music is very much constrained under temporal spatial constraints. And so our brain is adapting to this. So just very quickly, there are a lot of adaptations. I will not go too much into this. As you know, all musicians have different brains. They have larger sensory motor areas. They have larger auditory areas. They have a larger cerebellum. They have a larger callosal body linking both hemispheres together. This is all known. And what is happening is, of course, neuroplasticity. That means the adaptation of the nervous system to processing of relevant and mostly complex stimuli, and that is exactly what dance and music is. And there are different time axes. So in the beginning, already after a couple of seconds, the synapses are going to fire more efficient. They will release more transmitters. And then after a couple of minutes, you will recruit more neurons. That means you will involve other neurons into a network, for instance, of seeing and hearing. And then the amount of synapses will need a couple of minutes until new synapses are formed. Dendrites, that is the ingoing station of the neuron. The dendrites is where the information goes into the neuron. The dendrites need a couple of days until they are stable. And then, of course, new neurons are in adult people only built in the memory parts of the brain. That means the hippocampus and in the olfactory bulb for smell. But in the rest of the brain, of the adult brains, we do not have new neurons, probably. It's not easy to investigate. But we can reduce physiological apoptosis, the dying of neurons, by involving them in meaningful and joyful activities. So there's a netto surplus of neurons if you do a lot with your neurons you like to do. So, and finally, of course, we have the degree of myelination. That means the isolation of the axons here, the myelin cells, I told you, which is so important for the 65-year-old musician to have a very big connection between the auditory and the frontal lobe. And then, of course, we have interaction with the glial tissue and with the capillaries. So we have a kind of, it's like in a muscle, we need an infrastructure for our brain. So these are all the changes which are mostly powerful induced by making music and by understanding music. Now, how do we learn movements? So I think you know this quote too. So the object of the method is, in the first instance, to create by the help of rhythm a rapid and regular current of communication between brain and body. This is easily said, but there's a complex philosophy behind it, because it shows that most thing in the learning process is inhibition. We have to accelerate by inhibiting unusual and unnecessary movement. And this can be beautifully shown in investigations we did with drummers a couple of years ago. So what we did is a mocap study, so you mostly are familiar with this. So we have sensors here on the arms, and the task for the drummers is to play very fast, 6 per second. And we measure the movement trajectories in the stick, the metacarpophalangeal joint, the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder. And what comes out is amazing. So what you see here, this is my colleague in Hanover. It's Andreas Böttger, who, by the way, was a student friend of mine in Freiburg. So here, that's 1 second. This is a trajectory of the stick. And you see how regularly, how beautiful the trajectory is. This is a trajectory of the metacarpophalangeal joint. And now, if you look at the trajectory of the wrist, there's almost no movement. Elbow, almost no movement. And here, shoulder, no movement at all. So this is, in German, we say, schüttelt das richtig aus dem Handgelenk. So he's producing it just from the very, very low masses of the wrist. This is inhibiting the rest of unusual movements like I do here, which is awful. I'm sorry to show this. Here. I'm sorry, yeah. And I really tried it. I was slower, I was completely irregular. I was unable to anticipate the rebound of the stick. And of course, I have far too many movements, and you can see even my wrist is moving here, the green one. It's not easy to see. So I do it like this, because I'm unable to inhibit my activity of the upper arm. That's the point. So this is what you have to learn. So learning is, or I would say, the acquisition of smoothness in movements and of fine motor skills is the inhibition of the naturally inborn gross motor system we have. So learning is always inhibition. So that is one thing. And where does it take place? So now we come to a very short wrap-up. So musical learning has effects on many networks. Of course, here we have our Dalcroze brain, auditory, motor, visual integration, of course, networking. In the midbrain already, that means in the subconscious parts of the brain, we have already a kind of crosstalk. There are reflexes which are auditorily, motorly somehow programmed. And the limbic system is important to give us motivation. But the basal ganglia, they are the places where we do this kind of inhibition, because they are here for learning and automation of new routes. So in the beginning, when you do this here, the Luria task, you will need your supplementary motor cortex. and you have to count which finger I do. But when you do it very frequently, this information will be stored as an automation of new rules here in this very complex network of basal ganglia. So this is nothing else than a kind of very complex relay stations where we can influence neuronal activation and make it more and more efficient. And so what you can see here, there's a lot of relay stations, and each of the relay stations is subject to learning. And so the learning which takes place then will be fed back to the motor cortex, and then it finally will be led down to the spinal cord. So every movement, when we plan, first has to pass through the basal ganglia, and there it will be somehow controlled for efficiency and for beauty. And even, I have to say, I go on, yeah, so task selection, inhibition of ongoing programs, self-activation of voluntary movement, and that's very important. The basal ganglia are the place where emotions are linked to our movements. So this is where the big connection is between what we all do. So if we do gestures, it's always expressive. We cannot be unemotional when we move. It's like, for instance, the voice is an extremely complex motor system, and it's always emotion in some way. Okay, so this was heavy stuff. Now we go to more simple things. We were very much interested in what we call mirror neurons. So if you watch people, pianists, for instance, listening to piano music, you sometimes can even find that they move their fingers even at a very little content. And we did exactly this kind of study. So what we made is we asked pianists to listen to simple piano tunes, la da dim, la bi da bam bam, something like this. And while these pianists are listening, you see they have a huge activation, and you know already what this is it of the motor cortex. They don't move. We control for movement and for EMG, so that's very clear. And then we have it, by the way, it's also not so clear. It's interestingly, it's the right hand. The piano tunes are played by the right hand of a pianist, so it's only the left hemisphere. Now, if we make the same pianist just move on a muted keyboard, just pianistic finger movements, very nice thing. You have activation of the language centers of Broca's area. And Broca's area, of course, is much more than just being a language center. It's a center for any complex sequence of movements which is linked to meaning. That's the point. That was a new concept. And then there was a region which was all the time active, and this is the interface. This is a part of the brain which was newly found here, which links movement to sound and sound to movements. So this is a kind of the play where our brain networks are wired, plugged together. This also works if we only watch pianistic hands in a muted video. So we did this experiment together with friends in Munich. So people just watch this kind, pianists watch this kind of hand moving on a keyboard, and what you can see is motor area, again Broca's area, and here again an area, auditory areas here, and the cerebellum. So you find a huge additional activation of the sensory motor and the auditory networks, and this is exactly what we call the mirror neuron system. And this is how imitation and how your model is acting when you present something to your students. So it's so important to be somehow acting in the correct way, because people will adopt this. So the oldest and most important learning system, that's a mirror neuron system. So, and it's already present when we are born. So if a mother takes out the tongue to the newborn baby, the baby will try to respond via the neural neuron system. So that's a very, very basic thing. Okay, now let's come to the third part, to music therapy. There are two physical agents by means of which we appreciate music. These two agents are the ear as regards sound and the whole nervous system as regards rhythm. Experiences has shown me that the training of these two agents cannot easily be carried out simultaneously. A child finds it difficult to appreciate at the same time a succession of notes forming a melody and the rhythm which animates them. So if we move, whatever we do, for instance, very clearly in the language, there's rhythm behind it. This rhythm is, by the way, very dependent on the mother tongue. So the Swiss, for instance, my father was Swiss, they have a very rhythmic speaking, and they speak in a different way than the Germans do, and the Finnish people has also very different rhythm, and the French people have a different kind of rhythms. So this is all very basic. And so we can use this kind of temporal contagion and temporal, how to say, entrainment. We can use this in therapy to restore what Jacques Dalcroze called the arrhythmia. So here you find an arrhythmic patient, and he has a stroke. Left arm is affected, and what you cannot see it so clearly here, he has sensors on the upper and the lower arm. This is my collaborator Daniel Scholz. He's a psychologist, a very nice friend of mine, and he's at the same time also a composer, jazz composer, and has a degree in composing. So the idea was, let's make our patients compose music with the arm. And so we put the sensors here, and then they have the task to replay some children's song. So this children's song should be Alle meine Entchen. I have to say that Daniel has a different concept of Alle meine Entchen than I have. You will hear it here. It's really very difficult for the patients because the subjective labor is very high. He has a paretic arm. For him, it's very, you see it, he's really, yeah. And now it should go up, but Daniel says that Alle meine Entchen goes down. I'm sorry for this. Just to understand the idea, the principle is you have 3 dimensions to code. So in the vertical dimension, it's a pitch. La ba 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 bum da 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 dum. In the horizontal plane, it's a sonority. So it's going from a kind of sound of clarinet to a sound of flute, like something like this. And here it's intensity. So it's going from very loud, very soft. So and with these 3 dimensions, we can somehow motivate the patients to try to imitate and then later to compose. And the long-term vision of this project was when they are at home, in the kitchen, getting the coffee down from the board, from the shelf, they can compose their own coffee melody, and they can compose their, melodies to brush the teeth or things like this. So that is a wonderful sonification of daily life, which might be somehow playful. Don't take it too structured, but maybe exploring movements and motivate for movement. So that's why we took a mobile system. So it worked in some patients very well. This is boring. I think I will not be too long on this one. 2 patients who improved a lot. So improvement is always when you get larger here. So they improved a lot here. Patient A, he's only in this task. He's not improving, but he's improving all other tasks. So the task we do, this is a Vogel-Meyer test. This is in neuropsychology, just imitation of certain movements, and you have a scoring, and that's very standardized, and it's a well-established measure of upper extremity mobility. This is an action research arm test. This is a box and block test. This is a 9-hole pegboard test, and that is a stroke impairment scale. So we had a kind of measures of movements which we just took before and after, and we made about 40 patients to do the training, 20 patients with music, 20 patients without music, but same movements. So we tried to be a real prospective controlled and randomized study. So however, what turns out, it's not so easy. Life is not easy. So this is before and after the Vogel-Meyer test. So it should be down here, but it's not down. There are some who improve a lot. There are some who improve a lot, but it's not statistically significant in the whole group of 20 patients, 40 patients. And here, the same. There are some who improve a lot in the action research arm test. Others do not. So it seems that this is in some way not so easy. There might be a different response to this kind of sonification approach. So what we found is that subjectively, They have much less pain. So what many people do not know, that many stroke patients have a lot of pain in the impaired arms because of the spasticity and because of the distortion of the sensory afferent information. And then, of course, improve subjective well-being and hand functions. So the solution is that we have to, you have a question? Yes, okay, your question.
How often was the training?
Oh yeah, that's, I'm sorry. Yeah, the training was, it was for 3 weeks, 5 days a week for 20 minutes. So this is just what you can do in a rehabilitation hospital. And 20 minutes, this is what all of you who work with patients, is just the maximum because it's extremely exhausting. So that's a good question. Sorry that I didn't mention it. Good point. So what we now have to do, the solution for me is we have to have more nicer music. So we now switch to a different technology, leap motion. Much more beautiful. Okay. And here? So you can do a lot of plays, I think, with this. So I also like the Debussy. For Debussy here. Okay. Ein Flötist, glücklich natürlich. So that's. I mean, we are still in the stage. We have now implemented this the last week, and we are going to do this all in collaboration with a huge rehabilitation hospital, Hessisch-Oldendorf, close to Hanover. And there's also where Daniel presently is. Okay. Now I come to the end. To why do we have music and why are you all here? And of course, this is now the questions. This is my hobby. Of course, music is universal in time, and I think this is so beautiful to see on the one side the mouth-bowing boy from the Kalahari, and on the other one the shaman du Caverne du Volpe. And it's exactly the same instrument, the same posture, everything is exactly the same. So you see here, this wonderful instrument has been in the world at least 18,000 years. And now if you look at these two, they are really Dalcroze students, you know, rhythm and movement, and they have the same pace, the same rhythmicity, the same optimist and the same positive thing. And by the way, the painting is wonderful in the rhythmicity here, and the photograph is wonderful in the vertical and horizontal rhythmicity too. So it's a real masterpiece. These two things are real masterpieces, I have to say. So I come, as you have noticed, I come from Hanover, but I was born in Swabia, close to this wonderful area here. So I come from, by the way, this is the source of the Danube, and Rottweil is here. And so if you go 1,200 kilometers Danube up from Vienna, you will come close to Schelklingen, and in Schelklingen you will find this wonderful 50,000 years old flute, which has been digged out by a colleague, Mr. Conard, and are wonderfully played by a Viennese flute player, Mrs. Einwögerer. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Did you recognize it? The piece of music, it's Bach, Art of the Fugue, first contrapunct. It's an A minor chord, so nothing else. So the interesting and the surprising thing is they have a diatonic scale. So it's the same diatonic scale we have today. And Mr. Conard is saying, well, this is a local culture in Central Europe, and the diatonic scale has been preserved for 50,000 years. This is hard to prove, and it's more speculation. But it's nice to think in this kind of connections to the old times. So I come to my idea of the origins of music. There are many origins of music. And the most oldest one is probably linked to all kinds of at least vertebrates or at least mammals. So you see a Rottweiler dog, and if you now hear him, you will be not very happy when you are a runner. So this is, of course, this is a kind of aggressive call. It's the typical and universal features are low frequency, high roughness, and crescendo. Something like this. Yeah, and by the way, when you when you like horror movies, I mean all these Draculas, and then they all have this kind of, or the orcs in a lot of the rings. Okay, now here. That is a different way. We all understand it. It's affiliative. So this is high frequency, and it's a little bit softer in voice, and also it's a kind of faster movement. And so this is the beginning of what we call emotional acoustic signals, which are somehow organizing social connectivity in terms of either getting in distance or getting close. So this is here exactly. So social regulation, distance, closeness, and approach avoidance. And of course, we have this kind of features in all musical activities. So we find this, and they are even explicitly somehow composed. If you think about Modest Mussorgsky pictures at an exhibition, not an inhibition exhibition. So, okay. So we have here the blue one, that means what it is in bodily terms. So this is homeostasis, regulation of the autonomous nervous functions. It's just that we keep our emotional equilibrium. This is important. Now we come to a wonderful other animal, which I love so much, the gibbons. So, male and female, it's a couple. Deep voice is male, high voice female. Now that's a 3 hours sound file. They are duetting, and they do this to somehow share their sympathy and communicate, because these gibbons live in lifelong, how to say, Einehe? Monogamy, lifelong monogamy, what is very rare in humans, but here, you see it here. So, what we have in principle, this kind of duetting is regulating the closeness between this couple, and they do it every morning for 3 hours in the trees of the virgin forests of Cambodia and of Vietnam, and you can listen it even in the zoos. They do this also. So this is about group binding, and also we have similar interactions in mother-child, and we have this already in a couple of mammals which do the same. And what you need for this, of course, is sensory motor maturation, and you need neurohormones. So you must be somehow rewarded by doing this activity, and the gibbons are rewarded by release of oxytocin and of dopamine when they do this. And so this will form this kind of lifelong monogamy. Thank you so much for giving this. So now we have the ability. So we are back here. This is in our evolutionary tree about 2 million years ago when we spread out from the gibbons. Now we are in the time where we can have our ability for rhythmic melodic discrimination and structuring. And this is linked also to evolution of brain structures and of tongue control, for example, and of motor control and of the so-called pyramidal system. And then we develop about 400,000 years, we develop languages. And these languages are mainly starting with gestures, and then going to gestures of the mouth and the tongue. And then they are organizing divided labor. And this is what you can find, for instance, if you go to Lower Saxony, we have the so-called famous arrows of Schöningen, where 400,000 years old hominids did a kind of joint action to chase for wild horses. And they had to have some communication means, gestures, to somehow get this kind of hunt organized on the wild horses here. So this is societal organization and hierarchies, which is also very important. But we stayed with music. So this is now the new music. This is the music we have as an art. And this is probably 100 to 150,000 years old. And this is, my colleague Anirudh Patel calls it a transformative technology of the mind. So on the basis of these possibilities we had from our body and from our mental capacities, we developed a kind of art which has a lot of consequences for our society: binding, affect modulation, spirituality, hidden qualities. That means that when you do music, you show something about your own health status, you show something about your social relatedness, you show something about your emotions, you show something about your fitness, you show something about your intelligence. These are all the hidden qualities you show when you are doing rhythmics, for instance. And then, of course, we have a lot of wonderful neurobiological consequences. For instance, we have therapy, we have an improvement of immune status if we do music. We have ear training, so we have a facilitation of language acquisition, and we have facilitation of memory formation. For instance, with music we can facilitate linguistic memory, and of course we have a lot of neurohormones and also like dopamine, but also endorphins if we have this kind of chill responses. So here we have, on the basis of something our body developed before, we have then developed a kind of new technology which is so important for our social life and for our social connectedness. And Anirudh has a very clever article on this, because he somehow compares it to the control of fire making, which also has took place about 200,000 years ago. So the control of fire making was, of course, linked to the motor abilities to produce fire. And this, of course, had to be on a basis of some refinement of the motor system of the hominids. But when we controlled fire, a lot of our world changed, because first of all, we didn't need our fur anymore, so we lost our hair. By the way, the European barb is from the Neanderthals, the Asian one is from the Homo sapiens. So we lost the hair, we lost our muscles, the lower chin and the teeth became to shrink, became smaller. Our gut lost about 1.5 meters in the last 200,000 years, and we were able to develop a lot of brain resources because we had much more time now to ingest high-calorie diet by eating meat, and though the control of fire had a lot of impacts on our body. So, and finally, the last 20,000 years, music is a carrier for language, and this is very important to remain as a memory. So if we look here, so the one root of music, of course, is just a very old, I would say, in the animal kingdom, at least in the mammals, we have this kind of very old emotional regulation system. And on the other hand, we have this kind of transformative technology of the mind. So we have two roots of music. And this, if you look here from here to here, this is, of course, unified in one person, and this is from my city, this is from Rottweil, this is Orpheus. And Orpheus, who was so beautifully singing and playing that he could even influence the dogs, and there's a lion, you cannot recognize him, and he could talk to the birds. And so he was able to communicate with all living things, and he was even able to overcome death. So I thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you so much. Thank you.